Maloney, and welcome to Eyewitness News at 8. We are going to start with some interesting news coming from Quinnipiac University about a strange murder that has occurred. Our reporter Matthew Dolan is down at the scene at Quinnipiac University to give us the news. Matthew?
I am Matthew Dolan, reporting from the scene of a potential homicide at Quinnipiac University. The main suspect in this case is Minnie Wright, who is believed to have murdered her husband yesterday in their farmhouse by the use of strangling him with a rope. This is an interesting case in that usually one feels comfort being in the safety of their own home with the one they love. However, the one you love may be the actual individual that causes you the most harm. A couple of individuals came to the very messy scene today to find any possible evidence they could. These individuals included Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, the sheriff, the sheriff's wife, and the county attorney. Mr. Hale was the first individual that was notified of the murder when he went to the Wright farmhouse to go talk to Mr. Wright.
Mr. Wright and I had always been fairly close. Every Saturday, we'd meet up at the local bar and talk about the Dodgers. He was a big Dodgers fan. Anyway, I've been always trying to sell him the telephones I've been selling to people. Yesterday, I went to the farmhouse once again to sell the telephone. And I knocked on the door and got no response. I knocked again and I heard Mrs. Wright's quiet voice telling me to come in. When I walked in, I saw Mrs. Wright sitting in a rocking chair. She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleating it. Well, she looked queer, as in she didn't know what she was going to do next. I had asked Mrs. Wright several times whether or not John was home. After asking with no constant answer, she answers yes. I followed by asking if I could see him, and she replied no, he's dead. She points upstairs to where John was allegedly killed, and she says he was killed by a rope around the neck. Shocked and astounded, by the news, I immediately called Harry.
While all the gentlemen all went upstairs to examine the exact scene of the murder, the two women of the group stayed downstairs to look for any possible evidence there. I asked Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters about Mrs. Wright's marriage and her relationship with her husband. Mrs. Wright, before she had married Mr. Wright.
She was certainly different, that's for sure. I'd been so close with her for years earlier with Mrs. Wright, as she was such a lively person. I'd see her around town whistling around with a big smile on her face. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively. When she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir, but after that she had married John Wright, it seemed a lot different. She lost her whole persona and became a different person. A new person. I wouldn't see her around town as much anymore, and that smile she once had would just disappear.
Did you do anything to try to help her at the time?
I didn't, but I regret not coming over to her house to see if anything was wrong. I wish I was there to help her earlier. Oh, Mrs. Wright is such a fine lady. This is terrible. Everyone thought the marriage was going to go pretty well, but now you can see that it's a lot different than her personality.
Tell me about the first piece of evidence you have found, the quilt.
This is a quilt that Mrs. Wright was sewing at the time my husband entered the farmhouse. The way the sewing was placed can give us representation of her mood she was feeling at the time. All the rest of it has been so nice and even, and look at this. It's all over the place. We imply that the sewing is all over the place. She was nervous at the time. This is when my husband was asking her questions, so she was definitely worried about something that she did to her husband, and then we would find out that she may have killed her husband.
That's very interesting. What's the next piece of evidence you guys have found?
The next piece of evidence we found is the broken door of the bird cage. To be honest, the way it looks to be that this was ripped off. And what's peculiar is that there was no sign that bird was in or was in the bird cage.
Yes. Now look at this door, it's broke. One of the hinges pulled apart. It looks as if someone must have been rough with it. One may ask who would do this. It would either be Mr. or Mrs. Wright, since they were probably the only two at the farmhouse at the time.
Well, from what we found next, we think this was the act of Mr. Wright, and that we have actually found the dead bird in the sewing box across the room. Over there. Somebody wrung its neck.
This was definitely the act of Mr. Wright. She liked the bird. No, Mr. Wright wouldn't like the bird. A thing that sang? She used to sing. He killed that too. Mr. Wright was a rough man who was hard to be around. That was the reason why I haven't entered the family house in years.
We have concluded from the evidence we found that Mr. Wright had been treating his wife extremely poorly over the last couple of years. When he was angry with her, he turned to violence and even killed the bird Mrs. Wright had loved so much. Mrs. Wright seemed to had enough of all this violence when she snapped and killed her husband. This is the most realistic conclusion we have come up with. But all I know is that even though Mrs. Wright was treated poorly.
As for the men who went searching for clues upstairs,
Unfortunately, us guys weren't able to find any clues near the murder scene upstairs. We hope to come back tomorrow and search for more clues to find out who did this.
for Mrs. Wright, she's being held in the county jail and is being questioned on what happened in her house yesterday. It seems from today's search that the women have found more evidence by searching around the house and not just the murder scene. All fingers point to Mrs. Wright being the killer, but no one is sure yet. We will update everyone if more information comes soon. Matthew Dolan at Quinnipiac University, Eyewitness News.